Once upon a time, many, many years ago, as time is calculated by men, but which was only yesterday in the celestial calendar of heaven, there was, in paradise, a most miserable, thoroughly unhappy, and utterly dejected cherub, who was known throughout heaven as the littlest angel. He was exactly 4 years, 6 months, 5 days, 7 hours, and 42 minutes of age when he presented himself to the venerable gatekeeper and waited for admittance to the glorious kingdom of God. Standing defiantly, he tried to pretend that he wasn't at all impressed by such unearthly splendor, and that he wasn't at all afraid. But his lower lip trembled, and a tear disgraced him by making a new furrow down his already tear-streaked face, coming to a precipitous halt at the very tip end of his small, freckled nose. But that wasn't all. While the kindly gatekeeper was entering the name in his great book, the littlest angel, having left home as usual without a handkerchief, endeavored to hide the telltale evidence by snuffing, a most unangelic sound, which so unnerved the good gatekeeper that he did something he had never done before in all eternity. He blotted the page. From that moment on, the heavenly peace was never quite the same, and the littlest angel soon became the despair of all the heavenly host. His shrill, ear-splitting whistle resounded at all hours through the golden streets. It startled the patriarch prophets and disturbed their meditations. Yes, and on top of that, he inevitably and vociferously sang off-key at the singing practice of the heavenly choir, spoiling its ethereal effect. And being so small that it seemed to take him just twice as long as anyone else to get to nightly prayers, the littlest angel always arrived late, and always knocked everyone's wings askew as he darted into his place. Although these flaws in behavior might have been overlooked, the general appearance of the littlest angel was even more disreputable than his deportment. It was first whispered among the seraphim and cherubim, and then said aloud among the angels and archangels, that he didn't even look like an angel. And they were all quite correct. He didn't. His halo was permanently tarnished, where he held onto it with one hot little chubby hand when he ran, and he was always running. Furthermore, even when he stood very still, it never behaved as a halo should. It was always slipping down over his right eye, or over his left eye, or else, just for pure meanness, slipping off the back of his head and rolling away down some golden street just so he'd have to chase after it. Yes, and it must be here recorded that his wings were neither useful nor ornamental. All paradise held its breath when the littlest angel perched himself like an unhappy fledgling sparrow on the very edge of a gilded cloud and prepared to take off. He would teeter this way and that way, but after much coaxing and a few false starts, he would shut both of his eyes, hold his freckled nose, count up to 303, and then hurl himself slowly into space. However, owing to the regrettable fact that he always forgot to move his wings, the littlest angel always fell head over halo. It was also reported, and never denied, that whenever he was nervous, which was most of the time, he bit his wingtips. Now, anyone can easily understand why the littlest angel would, sooner or late, have to be disciplined. And so, on an eternal day of an eternal month in the year eternal, he was directed to present his small self before an angel of the peace. The littlest angel combed his hair, dusted his wings, and donned an almost clean garment, and then, with a heavy heart, trudged his way to the place of judgment. He tried to postpone the dreaded ordeal by loitering along the street of the guardian angels, pausing a few timeless moments to minutely pursue the long list of new arrivals, although all heaven knew he couldn't read a word. And he idled more than several immortal moments to carefully examine a display of aureate harps, although everyone in the celestial city knew he couldn't tell a crotchet from a semiquaver. But at length and at last he slowly approached a doorway, which was surmounted by a pair of golden scales, signifying that heavenly justice was dispensed within. To the littlest angel's great surprise, he heard a merry voice singing. The littlest angel removed his halo and breathed upon it heavenly, then polished it upon his garment, a procedure which added nothing to his already untidy appearance, and then tiptoed in. The singer, who was known as the understanding angel, looked down at the small culprit, and the littlest angel instantly tried to make himself invisible by the ingenious process of withdrawing his head into the collar of his garment, very much like a snapping turtle. At that, the singer laughed a jolly, heartwarming sound and said, "So you're the one who's been making heaven so unheavenly. Come here, cherub, and tell me all about it." The littlest angel ventured a furtive look, first one eye, and then the other eye. And suddenly, almost before he knew it, he was perched on the lap of the understanding angel, and was explaining how very difficult it was for a boy who suddenly finds himself transformed into an angel. Yes, and no matter what the archangel said, he only swung once. Well, twice. Oh, all right then, he swung 3 times on the golden gates, but that was just for something to do. That was the whole trouble. There wasn't anything for a small angel to do, and he was very homesick. Well, not that paradise wasn't beautiful, but the earth was beautiful too. Wasn't it created by God himself? Why, there were trees to climb, and brooks to fish, and caves to play at pirate chief, the swimming hole, and sun, and rain, and dark, and dawn, and thick brown dust, so soft and warm beneath your feet. The understanding angel smiled, and in his eyes was a long-forgotten memory of another small boy from long ago. Then he asked the littlest angel, what would make him most happy in paradise? The cherub thought for a moment, and whispered in his ear, "There's a box. I left it under my bed back home. If only I could have that." The understanding angel nodded his head. "You shall have it," he promised, and a fleet-winged heavenly messenger was instantly dispatched to bring the box to paradise. And then, in all those timeless days that followed, everyone wondered at the great change in the littlest angel. For among all the cherubs in God's kingdom, he was the most happy. His conduct was above the slightest reproach. His appearance was all that the most fastidious could wish for. And on excursions to Elysian fields, it could be said, and truly said, that he flew like an angel. Then it came to pass that Jesus, the Son of God, was to be born of Mary, of Bethlehem, of Judea. And as the glorious tidings spread through paradise, all the angels rejoiced, and their voices were lifted to herald the miracle of miracles, the coming of the Christ-child. The angels and archangels, the seraphim and cherubim, the gatekeeper, the wing-maker, yes, and even the halo-smith, put aside their usual tasks to prepare their gifts for the blessed infant. All but the littlest angel. He sat himself down on the topmost step of the golden stairs and anxiously waited for inspiration. What could he give that would be most acceptable to the Son of God. At one time he dreamed of composing a lyric hymn of adoration, but the littlest angel was woefully wanting in musical talent. Then he grew tremendously excited over writing a prayer that would live forever in the hearts of men, because it would be the first prayer ever to be heard by the Christ child. But the littlest angel was lamentably lacking in literate skill. What, oh, what could a small angel give that would please the Holy Infant? The time of the miracle was very close at hand when the littlest angel at last decided on his gift. Then, on that day of days, he proudly brought it from its hiding place behind a cloud, and humbly, with downcast eyes, placed it before the throne of God. It was only a small, rough, unsightly box, but inside were all those wonderful things that even a child of God would treasure. A small, rough, unsightly box, lying among all those other glorious gifts from all the angels of paradise, gifts of such rare and radiant splendor and breathless beauty that heaven and all the universe were lighted by the mere reflection of their glory. And when the littlest angel saw this, he suddenly knew that his gift to God's child was irreverent, and he devoutly wished that he might reclaim his shabby gift. It was ugly. It was worthless. And if only he could hide it away from the sight of God before it was even noticed. But it was too late. The hand of God moved slowly over all that bright array of shining gifts, then paused, then dropped, then came to rest on the lowly gift of the littlest angel. The littlest angel trembled as the box was opened, and there, before the eyes of God and all his heavenly host, was what he offered to the Christ child. And what was his gift to the blessed infant? Well, there was a butterfly with golden wings, captured one bright summer day on the hills above Jerusalem, and a sky-blue egg from a bird's nest in the olive tree that stood to shade his mother's kitchen door. Yes, and 2 white stones found on a muddy river bank where he and his friends had played like small brown beavers. And at the bottom of the box, a limp, tooth-marked leather strap once worn as a collar by his mongrel dog, who had died as he had lived, in absolute love and infinite devotion. The littlest angel wept hot, bitter tears, for now he knew that instead of honoring the Son of God, he had been most blasphemous. Why had he ever thought the box was so wonderful? Why had he dreamed that such utterly useless things would be loved by the blessed infant? In frantic terror, he turned to run and hide from the divine wrath of the Heavenly Father. But he stumbled and fell, and with a horrified wail and clatter of halo, rolled in a ball of consummate misery to the very foot of the heavenly throne. There was an ominous and dreadful silence in the celestial city, a silence complete and undisturbed, save for the heartbroken sobbing of the littlest angel. Then, suddenly, the voice of God, like divine music, rose and swelled through paradise, and the voice of God spoke, saying, "Of all the gifts of all the angels, I find that this small box pleases me most. Its contents are of the earth and of men, and my son is born to be king of both. These are the things my son too will know, and love, and cherish, and then, regretful, will leave behind him when his task is done. I accept this gift in the name of the child Jesus, born of Mary this night in Bethlehem. There was a breathless pause, and then the rough, unsightly box of the littlest angel began to glow with a bright, unearthly light. Then the light became a lustrous flame, and the flame became a radiant brilliance that blinded the eyes of all the angels. None but the littlest angel saw it rise from its place before the throne of God, and he, and only he, watched it arch the firmament, to stand and shed its clear, white, beckoning light over a stable where a child was born. There it shone on that night of miracles, and its light was reflected down the centuries, deep in the heart of all mankind. Yet earthly eyes, blinded too by its splendor, could never know that the lowly gift of the littlest angel was what all men would call forever the shining star of Bethlehem.
Once upon a time, a very long time ago, a tiny star lived in the sky. A lonely little star he was, lost in the cold darkness, far away from all the other stars. Of all the thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of stars in the sky, he was the tiniest and the loneliest. No one ever looked at him, though indeed he had a very merry twinkle about him. Alas, people saw only the sun, striding across the sky in his golden boots of fire. And the moon, smiling at herself in her mirror of silvery frost. And the comets twirling like wheels of fire in the sky. Each night, the tiny star watched them from afar and thought, "How glad I am to be a star, for they are my brothers and sisters, and how very beautiful they are. And oh, how lovely must they seem to everyone who sees them." Then he would sigh and think again. I know I am but a little star, far off and away in the darkness. I know none can see me. Yet, if but one tiny child should see me and smile at me, I would be as happy as though I were the greatest shining star in the whole wide world. So each day and each night he glowed with all his might, thinking, tonight, this is surely the night. Surely someone will see me tonight and smile. But again, and alas, and always, the other stars were too bright, and no one ever saw him with his very merry twinkle in the night. The tiny star was lonely. Then it happened one night that a child was to be born. And the angel in charge of birthdays called all the other angels together and told them to find a star with a merry twinkle to put high in the sky for the little boy's birthday. A star for a little boy's birthday? Surely, thought the angels, this must be a wonderful child to have a star for his very own. Surely, then, we must find the most glorious star in all the heavens for such a child. So they went and summoned all the stars that ever glistened in the skies. The sun came, and with him came the moon. And with them came all the thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of stars. And when the people on earth saw them all rushing across the skies, they thought, soon we shall see a great thing. And they waited with great wonder and hope. The lonely little star waited in this far-off corner of the sky. No angel had seen him. No angel had called him. Oh, thought he, as he watched his brothers and sisters hurrying across the sky, oh, what a wonderful sight it will be for the child to see when the angel picks the star for his birthday. And he laughed aloud as the thought came to him. And soon all the other stars stood in long and shiny rows, each one of them thinking, surely I shall be chosen. Surely I shall be the one to shine on this holy night. Then the angel in charge of birthdays said, But one star is still missing. How shall we choose from all the stars if one is lacking? So the angel searched the heavens again. But no other star could they find. Then the angel in charge of birthdays looked and spied the tiniest flicker in the far-off corner of the universe. And though it flickered dimly, there seemed a merry laughter in its twinkling. "See," said the angel, "here is the missing star." And he stretched out his hand and gently plucked the tiny star from the cold darkness and set it before him. Then he said while he smiled, "Will you not shine for us tonight, little one?" The tiny star trembled to see himself before the bright company of angels. "I would," said he, "yet I am not worthy. I am but newly come, and but a dim flicker in all this world of light." Then suddenly he glowed brighter. "Oh, were I but strong and glorious, how I would shine for that child, how I would glisten in his eyes to see him laugh." Then said the angel, "Come, little one, you shall be our star. Come, I shall give you of my strength." And the angel breathed the brightness of his smile into the heart of the little star and set him high in the heavens. The little star laughed aloud with happiness. "Where is the child? Let me see him that we may be together." And the angel showed him the manger in the little town of Bethlehem. The night was silent, and the tiny star waited. Suddenly the cry of a newborn child flew high into the sky and came frightened to the little star. "Be not afraid," said the star. "See, I am with thee. I shall come with thee." And he shone into the town of Bethlehem and saw the manger and found the newborn child. "See, little child," whispered the tiny star, "see how merry I am." And the little child smiled at him. Then the star looked into his eyes and saw how they sparkled, as though they were filled with many stars. "Oh," thought the tiny star, "now I am not lonely. A child has smiled at me, and how bright are his eyes." Then the child stretched his arms towards the sky and played with the merry twinkling star. Then thought the star, "I must tell the earth. I must tell the world. I must tell how wondrous is the child born this holy night." And so out into the world he sped, bright with his smile of happiness, to tell of what he had seen. And high on the hills he found shepherds guarding their flocks, Come with me, he beckoned. Come with me, he sang. Shepherds watching in the night, see me now, shining so bright. Let me lead you with my light. Come and see my wondrous sight. And he brought them to the child, and the shepherds were happy. Then out over the desert he shone, and made the sands glisten for the kings who were bringing their gifts to the child. 3 great kings alone in the night, see me now, shining so bright. Let me lead you with my light. Come and see my wondrous sight. And he brought them to the child, and the kings were happy. All through the dark night, the star sang the song of his wondrous sight. The angels smiled to hear his song, and they too sang with him, and the whole world rejoiced. And all through the night, the little star watched over the child. Then soon the night faded away, and it was day. Now I can rest, thought the little star, twinkling with all of his might to stay awake. And slowly he went before the angel in charge of birthdays. Have I done well? He whispered, and fell fast asleep. Nay, wake him not, smiled the angel. He has done well, our little star. Let him rest. Then softly he took the tiny sleeping star and gently set him into a great crown of shining light. The little child slumbered in the manger. The tiny star slept in the crown of jeweled light. And once a year, on that very same night, the angel in charge of birthdays plucks the tiny star from the shining crown, wakes him, and sends him to shine in the eyes of all children all over the world. And that is why the eyes of children everywhere sparkle like stars on Christmas Day.
This story is as old as Christmas, And yet it's neither remembered nor told except by the tongueless ones, the water, the wind, the rain, and the snow, by the grasses, the trees, the rocks, and the earth. They've told the story for almost 2,000 Christmases past. They'll still be telling it 2,000 times 2,000 Christmases to come. The story of the tongueless ones. Whenever someone looked in his direction and bellowed, "Ayu," he came running because he was eager to please. But Ayu wasn't his name. No one knew from whence he came, or when, or how, or why. He may have been a forlorn and useless bit of jetsam from one of the caravans that were forever appearing and disappearing like mirages, with camel bells clanking and drivers howling for right-of-way through the narrow and crowded roadways of Bethlehem. He might have been 8, or he could have been 9. A childish collection of angles and knobs with an animated pipe stem on each corner for an arm or a leg. His clothing was a rat's nest of tattered rags, and his bobbing head was perched on his scrawny little neck like a fledgling heron on one leg. And yet there was something appealing in his dark eyes, something about his cherub's mouth that unlocked the heart and made passers-by stop and ask his name. But when Ayu tried to answer, the inquirer always hurried off. He'd been amused or shocked to learn that the child had some affliction that made him dumb. And from out his cherub's mouth, instead of words, would come a horrible deformity of sound. A scourging, piercing, ear-scraping babble of howls and braying gibberish. Yes, Ayu was without the gift of speech. And at night, in the stable of the inn where he made his bed, he would think of all the beautiful magic words he'd like to say. Just suppose a miracle should take place during the night, and tomorrow morning he could walk over to that stall and say,
"Good morning, Mr. Cow."
"Oh, wonderful."
"Hello, Mr. Sheep."
"Oh, magnificent morning." He could say anything and everything that he wanted to say. Or he could even tell the innkeeper that his name wasn't Ayu. Why, that wasn't a name. It was only a careless way of shouting, "Hey, you!"
Hey, you!
My name isn't A.U.
Hey, don't you hear me? Hey, you!
My name's Ezekiel.
But the most stupendous, overwhelming thing of all, he'd be able to sing. Sing with every word and note so sweet and clear and perfect that everyone in Bethlehem would stand rock still to listen. He'd be able to sing with the other children when they played their games.
Hop on the right foot, hop on the left foot, hop on to Jericho to buy a fat hen.
Yes, and he'd be able to sing right along with the foreign music maker, the one with the lyre and the tame bear, who walked the roadways and sang for coins.
Oh, a Babylon maiden will hasten the hours with kisses of honey and cinnamon flowers.
And at night at the inn, when the innkeeper and his guests were overflowing with wine and song, he'd never need to hide. Why, he could stand right by the fire and listen, because he could sing much better than anyone there.
Oh, fill the bowl up to the brim, let memory blend with wine.
And so each night, before Ayu closed his eyes, he said a prayer for the gift of speech and song, and faithfully promised, if God saw fit to grant these great blessings, that he would always speak words that were kind, gentle, and reverent, and he would always sing songs that were beautiful, joyful, and harmonious. Then he burrowed deeper in the hay, warm and content in his belief that in the morning, when the rising sun reached through the doorway and woke him up, he would open his eyes, and then he'd open his mouth, and very loudly and thankfully he'd say,
"Oh, thank you, God. Thank you very much."
But morning after morning, God disappointed him. And when months of mornings had vanished into Egypt, Ayu knew he would always be as voiceless as a tumblebug. as a wood tick, as a worm. Then Ayu resolved that he would never again open his mouth to make people laugh at him, and he made himself almost invisible as he went about his tasks and errands, darting from dark corner to darker entry, scurrying from sunless alleyway to shadowy passage. Then, when his work at the inn was done, he would trudge out of Bethlehem and wander the fields and hills. Travelers sometimes wondered when they saw his lonely little figure against the sky, and none of them could know that he wasn't lonely anymore. Why, he couldn't be lonely among friends. For he'd discovered that a brook could chatter and prattle and sing to him. And if he answered, or even if he sang, the brook didn't care a ripple that the sounds he made were harsh and unmusical. It went right on, singing as joyfully as ever. Yes, and the winds were forever whispering or humming. Sometimes they shook the trees, and the trees tossed their great limbs and made every leaf and twig join in with the singing. So Ayu sang, too, and the trees didn't care and the winds didn't care. And neither did the rain when it thrummed on the rocks or strummed through the tall grasses. Even though he shrieked and howled, the rain never slackened a single drop of melody. It went right on, just as though his horrible din was the most sublime music it had ever heard. And then Ayu would lie on the ground and listen to the small, faraway voices, the little voices deep in the ever-moving, ever-singing earth itself. The song they sang was very sweet, but so faint and distant he could never learn the melody. And so, listening to his friends, the tongueless ones, Ayu would fall fast asleep. And in the days that followed, he was a little scarecrow stuffed with happiness. He was stuffed so full that it inflated his scrawny chest, puffed out his stringy neck, and stuck out of his eyes and his ears and his nose and his mouth. This friendship with the tongueless ones was so far above the miracle he'd asked for in his prayers that Ayu took a long time every night to thank God for his generosity. He thanked him so meticulously and particularly and abundantly that his small fingers developed a cramp, and on each round, knobby knee was a round, knobby callus. And then, without the slightest warning at all, came the dreadful day. It began with the innkeeper kicking at the mound of hay where Ayu slept and bawling,
Ayu! Come out and get to work, you gibbering whelp of a puling camel! On your feet, voiceless cud of a goat, or I'll slice out your useless tongue and sell it for tallow!
Then at mid-morning of the dreadful day, when Ayu stuck one eye around the kitchen door to beg for his breakfast, the innkeeper's wife doused him with slimy dishwater and screamed,
Don't come grunting and squealing at my door, you miserable throat-sprung gutter rubbish. Take your pig patter to the swill trough and eat with the rest of the swine.
And in the dreadful day's afternoon, as Ayu was racing through Bethlehem on one of his endless errands, a tired thong snapped on his sandal, and the sandal went skittering through the air and fell on the proud and helmeted head of a swaggering centurion. The centurion plucked Ayu out of the crowd by his rags and held him at arm's length, demanding his name. When Ayu tried to answer, but only squeaked and squawked, the centurion shook him and bellowed,
Look at me, you voiceless offshoot of a dribble-mouthed alley rat. If ever again you foul my eyes, I'll send you to Rome to feed the emperor's lions.
And during the rest of the dreadful day's afternoon, no matter how fast Ayu ran, the story of his affliction and humiliation was always a street, an alley, or even a doorway ahead of him. He seemed to run through a forest of pointing fingers that threatened to pin him to a wall. Following hot on his heels raced a swarm of children who hooted and sang at him.
Empty mouth, what is the matter? Camel bell without a clapper. Empty mouth, what is the matter? Camel bell without a clapper.
And that night, as the dreadful day neared its end, Ayu was kept late at his tasks at the inn. Anyone could believe that half the known world had journeyed to Bethlehem, and the inn's great beams appeared to quiver with the clamor of wine-loosened tongues and the clangor of bawdry laughter. Ayu's tired, trembling legs carried him about with staggering armloads of steaming bowls and slopping mugs. Feet tripped him up, hands slapped his ears to ringing, and knees jolted his aching ribs. The one who discovered and recognized Ayu was a huge mountain of a man whose eyes rolled like quicksilver in their beds of jellied fat. One hairy paw brushed a crumb of stew from his beard, while the other fastened on Ayu's hair and lifted him to the tabletop. Then he brayed to the listening ears.
Hark ye, my friends. Behold what I've captured for your examination. Its mother was a whooping mudsucker. Its father a low-born maggot. And this is what came oozing out of the egg that was left to hatch in the dung heap. Oh, but you must not laugh, my friends. A centurion made it chirp today. And it has a wondrous golden voice that almost breaks the heart while angels weep in ecstasy. Tell me, would you like to hear it sing? You hear, slime of the muck heap? Will you sing, or shall I slit your tongue like a crow so you can speak like a human? Sing! Sing, I tell you! Sing!
So Ayu tried to sing, and at every tuneless howl, the crowd shouted its mockery. At every unmelodious screech, it roared its derision. At every discordant squeak, it loosed a thunderbolt of laughter that crashed and splintered on his head. His legs had no more strength than a blade of grass. His heart was a senseless, throbbing thing, and his mind was fear, and his body was shame, and his blood was tears. But he went on and on until the crowd had wrung the last outstanding guffaw, the final satisfying chuckle, the ultimate forced snigger from his wretched little body. And when it released him, he ran blindly off through the dark labyrinth of Bethlehem, a terror-stricken shadow racing for the quiet hills and the warm, comforting voices of the tongueless ones. But tonight there were no voices for Ayu to hear. Even though he held his breath, he could hear no sound from the tongueless ones. The brook was silent, the winds were mute, the grasses still, and every tree and limb and twig and leaf was motionless and quiet. Then Ayu howled and croaked and tried to make the tongueless ones answer him, but they remained silent and waiting, and he screamed and babbled and pleaded, but the tongueless ones were all silent while they waited and listened. Just listened and waited. This was the dreadful end of the dreadful day. And deserted by his only friends, Ayu threw himself down and buried his face, his misery, and his tears in the moss. After a while, he fell asleep. And as he slept, a great white star rose through the silence of the night to stand and shine its clear, bright light on Bethlehem. It was close to morning when Ayu returned to the inn. He tiptoed across the frosty stones of the dark courtyard and crept into the stable. For a moment, his fear held him motionless, for the stable was bathed with a bright, glowing radiance that flowed like molten sunlight over a man and a woman, and the manger where a child was cradled. Neither the man nor the woman appeared surprised to see Ayu. It was almost as though they'd expected him to come and were waiting. So he stole nearer, and the child lifted small hands and smiled at him. Then Au felt that he must speak to this child, so he whispered,
Hello there.
and the words Au spoke were as clear and melodious as the water of the brook. Then he said,
Hello, child.
and the words that came from Au's lips were as sweet as the winds, as perfect as each raindrop, and as soft as the long, flowing grasses. Then Au knew why he had been born never to speak until this moment, and why the tongueless ones of God's world of water and earth and air had all sung to him, and why tonight they had all been still and silent and waiting. Now the waiting was over. Now they were his voice, and he was their tongue, and his was their song to the child in the manger.
Close your eyes, precious one, for the world is your cradle. Close your eyes, blessed babe, while we sing you to sleep. Hear the breeze through the trees, in the mountain and meadow. It will sing you to sleep in a lullaby key. Lullaby of Christmas, lullaby for them. Precious eyes, sleepy eyes, close your eyes and
Yes, this story is as old as Christmas, and yet it's neither remembered nor told except by the tongueless ones, the water, the wind, the rain, and the snow, by the grasses, the trees, the rocks, and the earth. This Christmas they will tell their story again, as they've told it for almost 2,000 Christmases past. The few ears that hear will wonder at the strange, childlike quality in the voices of all the storytellers. But that's so very easy to understand. It's the bright, joyful, exultant tone of the boy who sang for them one early morning, one Christmas morning in Bethlehem.